So far, over a quarter into the NBA season, there's been two teams that are blatantly so far the two best teams in the NBA. And of course, that is the two Western Conference teams, the Golden State Warriors and the Phoenix Suns, who both right now are sitting at the top of the West tied with a record of 19-4, which is obviously insane to keep up that kind of pace for the first quarter of the season. The Warriors are really getting back to looking like themselves from all the way back in their dynasty from 2015 to 2019, and the Phoenix Suns just got their 18-game winning streak broken by the Warriors on Friday, and not to mention that they actually kept it going on Tuesday when they beat the Warriors at home. So really overall, despite there being a lot of other teams in the NBA that are going to make a really strong run at the NBA championship this season, so far the two best teams in the league, and definitely the two best teams in the West, is looking like it's between the Warriors and the Suns. So what I'm going to be doing in today's video is analyzing the two teams, comparing them, and ultimately deciding which team I think is the best in the West as of right now at this point in the 2021 and 2022 NBA season. So let's get right into the analysis. So let's start off by talking about the Golden State Warriors, and recently I actually did make a video about the Warriors and how they are really back to playing like the way they were, especially in 2015. That team compared to the current team, I think it's a very close comparison with the way that they function on both ends of the floor. So if you want some more of my in-depth analysis on the Warriors, feel free to watch that video as well. But so far this year, if we're talking about team statistics alone, the Warriors have definitely been the best team in the NBA, as they have an offensive rating of 112.5, which is absolutely insane. The second best offensive rating in the NBA right now, only behind the Utah Jazz, who also have a very good and dominant offensive system and are quietly also being one of the best teams in the NBA right now. And then the Warriors also have the far and away best defensive rating in the NBA at an astounding 100.2, and for the majority of the season this has actually been under 100 for the Warriors in terms of defensive rating, which in today's NBA is absolutely unheard of. I mean, to hold your opponents to under 100 points in 100 possessions is extremely hard to do in today's NBA, and the Warriors have done a fantastic job of being a dominant defensive team, just like they were back in the glory days. And if anything, their defense now is actually better than it has ever been in really the last decade. So overall, the Warriors do have a net rating of 12.3, which is the difference between your offensive and defensive rating, and this is far and away the best in the NBA right now, the only team in the NBA to have a double-digit net rating. And like I said, I do go more in depth with just how good this team's been overall in that video I made about them a couple weeks ago. But when we just briefly summarize what's gone right for this team so far this year and why they are looking like the best team in the NBA, and it's really close between them and the Phoenix Suns, like I'm going to talk about in today's video. But we start with Steph Curry. I mean, really what stands out about him so far this season for me is just his playmaking ability, and how when the offense flows through him, we've seen this throughout all of Steph's career, but this year specifically, his playmaking's just been insane, as he's averaging 6.5 assists so far this season, and really doing his typical thing of really having tons of gravity on the perimeter, drawing double teams, triple teams on the perimeter, and passing it to start great sequences of ball movement that end up in sometimes easy dunks for his team, sometimes wide open threes. So that's what's really stood out to me about Curry so far this year. And then scoring wise, still doing his typical thing, of course. So far this year, putting up 27.5 points per game on 61% true shooting, and still proving that he's far and away the greatest shooter of all time, shooting not only 41% from three this season, but doing it on insane volume, shooting 13.2 attempts from three so far this year, and of course constantly shooting really difficult shots from three, taking those step back threes with hands in his face and all that kind of stuff. And then overall, the chemistry on this Warriors team and the role players stepping up has really been the X factor with the change between last year and this year, because I mean, personnel with their core, it really hasn't changed that much, but role players like a guy like Gary Payton Jr., who has come in and been a very good defensive presence for them on the perimeter and plays his role well offensively. A guy like Juan Toscano Anderson, who can shoot that three a little bit, cut to the basket offensively when he needs to. And even a guy like Otto Porter Jr., who's been a great 3-and-D guy for them. Role players stepping up like this and getting into that system that the Warriors have offensively, and really now having that chemistry with this team, is, I think this has been the main difference for them this season. And then some of their young, more up-and-coming role players that are really playing a big role in this team. A guy like Andrew Wiggins, who still this year is averaging nearly 19 points per game and really fitting into that Warriors offensive system. I think even better than he did last year. And then Jordan Poole, who really has a case to be the sixth man of the year this year. So far this year, Jordan Poole is, honestly, he's really looking like a Steph Curry Jr. Like, he's putting up so far this year 18.2 points per game. And then also he's doing this pretty efficiently, shooting 46% from the field, 35% from three on pretty high volume, and 91% from the free throw line. And then obviously we have Draymond Green as well, who is still playing the role of being that playmaker, screen setter on this team. His role is always going to fit well in this Warriors offensive system, and overall their offense is just dominating. And then defensively for this team, when you look at all the team defensive stats, they easily have the best defense in the league. And I mentioned how they have a defensive rating of 100 right now, which is unheard of in today's NBA. And really it all starts with how their chemistry now with this core of, well, I mean, still their main core with Steph Curry and Draymond, but then also the role players that have really gotten used to the system, not only offensively but also defensively. It just starts with their chemistry and how good they are at communicating with each other, helping when they need to on drives, and on the perimeter being fantastic on covering for each other, rotating very effectively. That's really where this defense is their main strength, and that's why they're so good, especially on their rotations, and how they really always get the matchups that they want to. For example, in the pick and roll, they'll never have someone who they think could be picked on in that pick and roll. It'll always be probably Draymond being the defending the roll man, and probably like Andrew Wiggins or Gary Payton Jr., someone who's really good on the perimeter side of defense. They will be defending the pick and roll. Steve Kerr's just done a fantastic job with the defensive system, always getting the matchups he wants, whether it's, like I mentioned, in the pick and roll or one-on-one. And overall, this defense is just dominated so far this year. They also have fantastic on-ball defenders like Draymond Green, who also has a really high defensive IQ. As we know, he's probably still a top 5 defender in this league. And then Andrew Wiggins, who's really developing defensively, turning into one of the better on-ball defenders in the game as well. So overall, the Warriors have just completely dominated this year. If I had to change one thing about this team, it would be defensively, just that they can get one of those big men, and not James Wiseman because he's really not good on the defensive end of the floor. But when you look at when they played Phoenix, DeAndre Ayton was really able to pick on them, just because when he gets switches in the paint, they don't really have that inside big presence to guard him. But other than that, defensively, this team is pretty much flawless, and offensively, they're dominating under the offensive system led by Steph Curry. Now, when we talk about the Phoenix Suns, this is also a team who has obviously dominated to start this season, as they just got their insane 18-game winning streak snapped by the Warriors, like I mentioned earlier on in the video. And really, what I think is the difference between the Suns and the Warriors, and something that we really have to point out here, is that the Suns have proven that in recent history and last season, that they can get the job done in the playoffs and make a push to the NBA Finals with this core. And that's something the Warriors haven't necessarily done yet with this new core of role players that they had. Despite dominating so far this regular season, they haven't really done they haven't even actually made the playoffs with this core group of guys yet. And of course, they do have Klay Thompson back, which is something we do have to factor in as well to this debate between the teams. But when we look at the Phoenix Suns, they pretty much brought back almost the same core and almost the same team overall that they did last season, that really dominated on both ends of the floor. And when we look at the stats so far this season, they ranked 9th in the NBA in offensive rating with a 110.4 offensive rating, and then 3rd in the league in defensive rating with a 104.2 defensive rating, and an overall net rating of 6.2. So you can see here that the stats aren't nearly impressive as the Warriors, as they only have the 3rd best net rating, and the Warriors net rating is basically double the Phoenix Suns. But you also have to factor in that the first 4 games of the season, the Phoenix Suns were really just not playing like themselves yet, and since then they have been pretty much as good, if not better, than the Warriors. And when we look at this team offensively, the system with Chris Paul and Devin Booker is really working out well for them. And I did also make a video before the season telling people to really not sleep on the Phoenix Suns, and obviously this video has aged really well. And if you do want more in-depth analysis with me and the Phoenix Suns, feel free to watch that one as well. But to summarize, basically this team operates really, really well in the mid-range area. And in today's NBA, the mid-range is kind of thought of as a bad shot because the three-pointer is the lowest percentage shot, but you do get 3 points for it. So statistically, it's kind of more of an effective shot than the mid-range shot. And then, of course, at the rim, it's much easier to score there. But when you have guys like Chris Paul and Devin Booker on your team, who are two of the best mid-range scorers in the NBA, if not the two very best mid-range scorers in the NBA, it's really hard for defenses to kind of live with that shot, because that's the shot that the Phoenix Suns want to get. And I think that's really what their offense goes through, as you see sometimes Booker coming off of off-ball screens and just rolling to that mid-range area, getting to his spots at the elbows, which is so effortless for him, and he can shoot it there very easily. And then same thing with Chris Paul when he's operating in that mid-range area, using screens from DeAndre Ayton, having good spacing with that team, great plays as well, some other great plays other than the pick and roll to get him open in the mid-range areas. This is really where the Phoenix Suns offense operates at its best. And then when you've got a dominant post guy like DeAndre Ayton down there as well, that really helps to get some easy buckets down there. And then some great floor spacers like Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, Landry Shamet, Cam Johnson, and much more that can space that floor, knock down corner threes if you need. And then not to mention that this team is very, very good in transition as well. They're second in the league in points per possession in transition, and of course second in percentile as well, ranking in the 96th percentile in the league in transition, and then 8th in overall points per game in transition, and 7th in field goal percentage in transition. And overall, when they do push the pace, they're really effective. When you're led by Chris Paul, such a great playmaker with such a high IQ, who's still averaging 10 assists per game this season, obviously you're going to be a great transition team. And Monty Williams has really engraved it into these players' play styles to get out in transition and push that pace when you get a defensive rebound or a steal. So overall, their offense and transition offense is looking very good, and pretty much they don't really have that same system as the Warriors, but you could definitely make a case that their offense almost is as good as the Warriors. And then from what I've seen this year, if we put stats aside, the Phoenix Suns defense is actually maybe even better than the Warriors defense. And we've seen how the Phoenix Suns have really succeeded on defense for really over the course of last season as well, really effectively with this system with Monty Williams. And they have really good on-ball defenders that can switch as well. So when you have a one-on-one matchup in a game, for example, when they faced the Warriors that first time in Phoenix, Mikal Bridges did a really good job of guarding Steph Curry, and sometimes Chris Paul was on him too. And when you look at the on-ball defenders on this team overall, you've got Mikal Bridges, who is turning into one of the best on-ball defenders in the game, Jay Crowder, who's always been a really good on-ball defender, DeAndre Ayton, who down low in the pick and roll as well is probably one of the best big man defenders in the NBA. And then of course Chris Paul is not exactly the same defender that he was in his prime, of course, making all defensive teams, but he still has great hands, good instincts on the perimeter, and is a good off-ball defender, and is getting a lot of steals so far this year as well. And that's not even to mention Devin Booker, who isn't known as a good defender but is really improving defensively. And overall, in terms of defensive talent and defensive personnel, I would definitely say that the Phoenix Suns have a better defense than the Golden State Warriors. Now, in terms of the chemistry and things like rotations, the Phoenix Suns are still very good in that category, probably not as good as the Warriors defensively, but that's a really close debate there as well. So I mean, overall, these teams, but it goes without saying that both of them have completely dominated and took over the NBA season so far this year. But when it comes down to my final decision between the Golden State Warriors and the Phoenix Suns so far this season, and potentially going into the future of this season, I do have to give a slight edge to the Warriors. When we look at all the stats, really the Warriors do have the edge there. And not to mention, when you factor in the eye test here and what I've seen from the Suns and Warriors this year, and especially watching them play against each other, this is a pretty much equal tie. But we also have to factor in how Klay Thompson still hasn't come back yet, and that's just going to make the Warriors offense and defense, for that matter, just that much better. So the Warriors have really gotten back to the way that they played in 2015, and when they add Klay back, they're going to be so much more dominant with his insane shooting. We know that Klay is one of the greatest catch and shooters of all time, shooting 42% from 3 with taking a lot of tough shots, shooting an average of 7 3-point attempts per game throughout his career. Amazing percentage and volume from Klay from 3 throughout his career. We know he's one of the greatest shooters of all time, and pretty much when he comes back, maybe the 3rd or 4th best defender on this Warriors team as well. So I think that's really the X factor here. When you look at the future of the season, when Klay comes back, the Warriors are really going to continue their dominance and prove that they probably are the best team in the NBA right now. But I'm telling you guys, watch out for this Phoenix Suns team, because I would not be shocked at all if this team, despite them still being underrated after having an 18-game win streak, I think this team could run it back and potentially make the finals again this season and maybe win it. So it's a really close comparison. As of right now, I'd give it to the Warriors. What do you guys think? That's going to wrap up today's video, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments. Who do you think is better right now and in the future of the season between the Warriors and the Phoenix Suns? Let me know in the comments. I know today was a very long video, so if you stuck around to the end, I thank you guys a lot. You guys are the real ones for real. And if you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on all of my new NBA content. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next video.